There are certain words that, once spoken, do not simply float away. They settle. They stay. They become part of the architecture of a relationship, built into the walls, embedded in the floor, present in every room even when no one is speaking them out loud. You are not good enough for me. Those 6 words were spoken by a man named Gerald Booker to his wife of 19 years, Patricia, not in the heat of an argument, not in a moment of crisis, but casually. The way you mention the weather, the way you note that dinner needs more salt. Spoken as though they were simply true. Spoken as though Patricia had always known them, and he was merely confirming what both of them understood. He had said it before, more than once, in private, but he had never said it in public. He had never said it with 200 people listening and a live microphone 6 inches from his face and Steve Harvey standing 3 feet away. He said it now, and Steve Harvey, who had spent decades building himself into a man who understood exactly what it cost a person to be told they were not enough, turned to Gerald Booker with an expression that stopped every conversation in that studio cold. What he said next would be watched by millions, but it is what he said quietly near the end, directly into Gerald's face, that truly left the room without words. This is that story, and it is going to matter to you. Gerald Booker was 55 years old, a former college athlete turned civil engineer who had spent 30 years building infrastructure across the mid-Atlantic states. He was physically imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a doorway and knew it. He had grown up in a competitive household in Richmond, Virginia, the middle child of 5, raised by a father who measured success in achievements and a mother who made clear that praise was reserved for performance. Affection in the Booker household was not withheld cruelly. It was simply conditional. You earned warmth by being excellent, and you understood, without anyone having to say so directly, that average was not acceptable. Gerald had internalized that framework with the totality of a child who had no alternative model to compare it against. He had been excellent at sports, excellent at school, excellent at his career. He had a reputation in his professional life as someone who produced results with minimal tolerance for excuses, who ran tight timelines and tight budgets, and who communicated with the direct efficiency of a man who considered social softening a waste of everyone's time. His colleagues respected him. Some of them feared him slightly. He would have considered both appropriate. What that framework had never equipped him to do was love someone without grading them. Patricia Booker was 52 years old and had spent the last 22 years working as a licensed social worker, the last 14 of those years specializing in family services and domestic case management. She was, in the assessment of everyone who had worked alongside her, remarkable at her job. Patient, perceptive, genuinely present with people in the most difficult moments of their lives. She had a gift for sitting inside uncomfortable situations without flinching, a capacity that her colleagues attributed to her natural temperament and that those who knew her marriage well understood was also hard-won practice. Patricia had known Gerald since their mid-20s. She had been drawn to his certainty. The way he occupied space, the way he made decisions, the way he seemed to move through the world without the self-doubt that quietly plagued most of the people she knew, including herself. She had mistaken his confidence for security. It had taken years to understand that what she had actually married was not a secure man, but a man who needed everyone around him to be slightly less than he was, so that his own position was never in question. The comment, "You are not good enough for me," had first appeared in their marriage about 8 years in, during an argument about money. Gerald had deployed it like a tool, precise and targeted, in the way that people who study others long enough learn which word goes in which wound. Patricia had gone quiet when he said it. She had absorbed it. She had spent the following days building a small, careful wall around the place where it had landed, the way you cover a bruise. Not because the bruise is gone, but because you have learned that keeping it covered is what makes it possible to keep moving. He had said it again over the years. Rarely but enough. Always in private. Always when he felt his authority in the marriage needed reasserting. Always with the same quiet certainty, as though it were not an attack but an assessment, as though he were an engineer reviewing a structure and finding it wanting. Their son Darius, 26, had grown up watching his mother absorb these moments and his father deliver them with undisturbed composure. He had applied to be on Family Feud with his girlfriend Tamara and had invited his parents and his aunt Beverly, Patricia's older sister, to round out the team. He had told himself it was just for fun. He had told himself that. What he could not have predicted was that his father, in front of a studio audience on a Tuesday afternoon, would say the thing he had spent his childhood watching his mother survive, and that Steve Harvey would be standing close enough to hear every syllable. Beat 1T, confidence on stage. The Booker family arrived on stage projecting the kind of polished confidence that makes an audience like a family immediately. Gerald commanded the space in the way he commanded most spaces. Upright, assured, quick with a firm handshake when Steve worked the lineup. Patricia stood beside him warmly, greeting Steve with genuine lightness. Darius and Tamara were visibly excited, young enough to be thrilled by the camera and the crowd. Beverly, Patricia's sister, had the particular energy of a woman who had come to enjoy herself and intended to do exactly that. Steve spent his pre-game time with the family drawing out the small details. He asked Gerald and Patricia how they had met. Gerald gave a compact, efficient version. College mutual friends, married 4 years later. Patricia softened it slightly, adding the detail that Gerald had brought her flowers 3 times before she agreed to a first date, a fact that got a warm laugh from the audience and a small, private smile from Gerald that looked, for just a moment, like the younger version of the man she had said yes to. The game opened cleanly. Gerald was quick on the buzzer, competitive in the way that men who have spent 30 years outperforming others tend to be. Patricia read the room well and contributed answers with calm accuracy. Darius and Tamara fed off each other's energy. Beverly kept the family loose between rounds. Through the first 3 rounds, the Bookers played with the ease of a family that knew how to function as a unit, which made what happened in the 4th round feel like watching something solid and load-bearing give way without warning. Beat 2 the comment nobody expected. The exchange began as almost nothing. Steve, between rounds, was doing what he did, keeping the audience warm, pulling out the small details of family life that gave a show its texture. He turned to Gerald and Patricia and asked, with genuine curiosity and his familiar grin, "Now, after all these years together, what is it that makes Patricia the right partner for you?" It was the kind of question the show asked 50 times a season. It was designed to produce a warm answer, a funny answer, an answer that made the audience feel good about the couple in front of them. Gerald considered the question for a moment. Then he looked at Patricia and then back at Steve and said, with the same even, matter-of-fact delivery he used for everything, "Honestly, Patricia has always pushed herself to meet my standards. I will give her that. She works hard at it. She is not quite there yet, but she keeps trying. I appreciate that about her." He said it without a flicker of awareness that he had said anything that required a flicker of awareness. The audience response was immediate and visceral. A sharp, collective intake of breath followed by the low, unsettled murmur of 200 people simultaneously registering something that did not sit right. Someone near the back said, "Oh nah," with enough volume to be audible on the recording. Patricia's expression did not break. She had had 19 years of practice at not letting it break. She kept her eyes forward and her chin level and the smile on her face so completely still that it looked, from a distance, like composure, only from close up. Only if you knew what you were looking for could you see what it was actually costing her. Beverly, standing at the end of the lineup, had stopped smiling entirely. Darius looked at the floor. Steve Harvey looked at Gerald Booker with an expression that had nothing in it of the game show host. What was in it was something older and more personal than that. Beat 3. The weight behind the words Steve Harvey had grown up poor. He had known, from early in his life, the particular damage that comes from being told, directly or indirectly, that you do not measure up. He had built his career partly on the refusal to accept that verdict, and partly on the understanding of what it did to a person to receive it from someone whose opinion formed the whole of your world. He had also, by his own public account, been in relationships where he had wielded his own version of that power over women who loved him, Not necessarily in the same words, but in the same principle. He had spoken about it honestly in interviews, in his books, in the spaces where he chose to be accountable rather than defensive. He knew what it looked like from both sides of the exchange. He knew what it built in the person who said it, and what it dismantled in the person who received it. He was not going to let it pass. He paused the game with a quiet authority that required no announcement. He simply stopped. He set the card down. He turned to Gerald with his full attention, and the room, reading the shift in him, went still. "Gerald," Steve said, "I need you to hear something. What you just said about your wife. I need you to really hear what that sounded like." Gerald looked at him with the mild patience of a man who expected to be misunderstood by people operating at a lower level and had made peace with it. "I was paying her a compliment," he said. "I said she works hard. You said she has not reached your standards yet." Steve replied without heat, without performance, with the flat precision of someone who had listened carefully and was now simply reporting back what had been said. "Your wife. The woman who has been beside you for 19 years, you told her, in front of all these people, that she is still working on being good enough for you." Gerald opened his mouth. Steve did not raise his voice or accelerate. He simply continued, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Because I think you are a smart man, and I think smart men sometimes convince themselves that honesty and cruelty are the same thing. They are not." Beat 40. The defense Gerald did not have. Gerald Booker had navigated difficult conversations his entire professional life. He had sat across tables from city officials, union representatives, project managers in the middle of budget crises. He knew how to hold a position. He knew how to reframe. He knew how to make the argument that his assessment was simply accurate and that accuracy should not require apology. He tried the reframe. He said that he had high standards for himself and that he had always believed the people in his life were capable of meeting them. That he was not insulting Patricia. He was expressing belief in her potential. That his father had pushed him the same way, and he had become a better man for it. Steve Harvey listened to all of it, and then he said something that stopped Gerald completely. "Your wife is not your project. She is your partner. There is a difference, and it is not a small one." The audience did not applaud. They absorbed it. Steve continued, his voice quiet and unhurried. "You have spent 19 years with a woman who gets up every day and works with families in crisis. People at the worst moments of their lives come to her and she holds them together. She does that professionally, and she comes home to a husband who is still grading her." He paused. "Gerald, I need you to consider the possibility that the problem in this equation is not your wife." Beat 50. Patricia speaks. The moment Steve finished, the room sat in the particular quiet of people waiting for the person who had been spoken about to respond. Steve turned to Patricia gently and said, "I want to give you space, if you want it." Patricia was quiet for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice was level. The voice of a woman who had processed this particular pain so many times that she had developed a kind of clinical detachment around it, the way surgeons develop a steady hand. "I have heard some version of that for most of our marriage," she said. "I became a social worker because I believed that people could change. That with the right support, the right moment, the right words, people could see themselves and each other differently." She paused. "I have spent a long time hoping that belief would apply to my own house." She did not look at Gerald when she said it. She looked at Steve, and then at the audience, with the directness of a woman who had spent a career telling hard truths to people who needed to hear them and had decided that she was allowed to tell one herself. Darius, standing beside Tamara at the end of the lineup, had his jaw set and his eyes wet. He did not try to hide either. Gerald Booker was not a man who broke easily, and he did not break dramatically. What happened was quieter than that, and because it was quieter, it was more convincing. He had been standing in the same posture for the last 10 minutes straight, chest forward, the physical expression of a man who did not yield ground. But as Patricia finished speaking, as the words, "I have spent a long time hoping that belief would apply to my own house," settled into the air around him, something in that posture changed. Not a collapse, a release. The very small, Very significant difference between a man defending a position and a man letting go of one. He turned to his wife, not to Steve, not to the audience, to Patricia. I did not hear myself the way you hear me, he said. I have not heard myself, for a long time. He stopped. He started again. What I said just now, the way I said it, that is not a compliment. I understand that. I think I have always understood it, and I have called it something else because it was easier. Patricia watched him. You are a remarkable woman, he said. You have always been a remarkable woman, and I have spent 19 years behaving as though you needed to prove that to me, when the truth is I have never deserved the proof. His voice, which had been steady throughout, tightened for just a moment on the last word. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry. Not for today. For the pattern of it. Patricia did not respond immediately. She gave his words the respect of actual consideration, the way she gave everyone's words that respect, not rushing to reassure, not filling the silence with movement. When she finally spoke, it was quietly. That is the first time in 19 years you have apologized for the pattern, she said. Not for a specific thing. For the pattern. She looked at him steadily. I needed to hear that. I have needed to hear that for a very long time. The applause that followed was the kind that happens when a room full of strangers has been made to feel something they did not expect to feel when they arrived. Sustained, genuine, and slightly overwhelmed. Steve Harvey let it settle before he spoke. When he addressed the cameras, it was with the measured gravity of a man choosing his words because they mattered, not because the moment required filling. There is something I want every man watching right now to understand. The people who love you, your wife, your children, the people who chose to build a life alongside you, they are not measuring themselves against your standards. They are measuring themselves against their own, and every time you insert yourself as the judge of their worth, you are not lifting them up, you are placing yourself between them and their own confidence. That is not love. That is fear. It is the fear of a man who needs to be the most valuable person in every room he walks into, including his own home. He paused, and when he continued his voice was lower and more personal. I know that fear. I have lived that fear, and I can tell you from experience that the day you put it down is the day your marriage actually begins. Not the wedding day. The day you decide that the person beside you does not need to earn your approval. They need your respect. And they have been earning it every single day whether you acknowledged it or not. Gerald Booker nodded once. He reached for Patricia's hand. She looked at their joined hands for a moment, then looked up at him, and did not pull away. The moment that traveled, the episode aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, Steve's line, "Your wife is not your project, she is your partner," had been clipped, captioned, and shared across every major platform with a collective velocity that the show's social team described as unlike anything they had tracked in recent memory. It was not the drama of the moment that people were responding to. It was the precision of the language. The way Steve had taken something that many people had experienced but struggled to articulate and had handed it back to them in 11 words. Marriage therapists posted it with clinical annotations. Women tagged their husbands, their fathers, their brothers. Men shared it with quiet captions that read, simply, "This one hit." Several prominent voices in the relationship and mental health space wrote extended responses, not reactions, but genuine engagements with the distinction Steve had drawn between having high standards and using those standards as an instrument of control. Patricia's composed response, "I have spent a long time hoping that belief would apply to my own house," circulated separately, in spaces populated largely by women who worked in caregiving professions, and recognized in her words the specific exhaustion of someone who spent their professional life holding others together while absorbing something difficult at home. The response in those spaces was less about applause and more about recognition. Quiet, private recognition shared in the small hours. What Gerald chose next in the follow-up interview conducted 4 months after the episode aired, Gerald Booker was notably different from the man who had stood on that stage, not unrecognizable, but altered in the specific way that happens when someone genuinely confronts something rather than simply managing the optics of having been called out. He had started seeing a therapist 2 weeks after they returned from Los Angeles. He had not told Patricia he was going until after the 3rd session, when he was confident enough in what was happening to describe it honestly rather than provisionally. He told the interviewer that what he had encountered in those early sessions was a consistent confrontation with a simple question his therapist kept returning him: Ty, what were you afraid would happen if you let your wife simply be enough? He had not had an easy answer. That, he said, was what kept him going back. My father told me that the moment you stopped measuring yourself against something higher, you stopped growing. Gerald said in the interview, I believed that. I still believe a version of it. But I applied it to Patricia, and she was never supposed to be the benchmark I was running against. She was supposed to be the person I was running with. I confused those two things for a very long time. Patricia's own reckoning. Patricia was candid in the follow-up in a way that surprised the producers, who had expected her to center the narrative on Gerald's growth. Instead, she chose to be equally honest about her own choices, specifically the 19 years she had spent absorbing something she could have named out loud much earlier. I tell families in crisis every day that silence protects the pattern, not the person, she said. I have sat across from women and told them that staying quiet about something that is diminishing them is not patience and it is not wisdom. It is self-erasure. And then I went home and did it myself. She paused. I do not say that to be harsh to myself. I say it because it is true, and because I think it matters for other women watching to hear that you can know something professionally and still struggle to apply it to your own life. That does not make you a failure, it makes you human, but it also means you have to, at some point, stop waiting for the right moment and create one. She noted, carefully and without drama, that she and Gerald were still in marriage counseling, and that the process was neither simple nor linear. But she also noted that for the first time in years, she felt she was in a marriage of genuine equals. Two people who had agreed to look at things honestly together, rather than one person managing the other's perception of reality. What Darius said of everyone in the Booker family. Darius had been the quietest in the immediate aftermath of the episode. In the follow-up interview, he finally spoke at length, and what he said was perhaps the most important thing any member of the family offered. I grew up thinking that was just how my dad loved, he said. I thought that was what love with standards looked like. I did not have a name for what was wrong with it. I just knew that my mom always seemed like she was working very hard to be in a room that my dad occupied very comfortably, and I knew that I never wanted Tamara to feel that way with me. He looked at Tamara, who was sitting beside him. I have asked her, since that day, to tell me honestly if I ever make her feel that way. And I have meant it. Because I watched what 19 years of that does to a person, and I watched what one honest moment on a game show stage cracked open that my parents had not been able to open in all that time. I do not want to wait 19 years. I want to start right. Steve Harvey's final word, asked in a subsequent interview what had moved him to set aside the format of the show and confront Gerald as directly as he had. Steve Harvey gave an answer that was characteristically honest and entirely without performance. Because I have been told I was not enough, and I know what it does. And I have told people they were not enough, and I know what that does too. I am not proud of the second part, but I have done the work on it, and because I have done the work on it, I can recognize it when I see it. Gerald was not a bad man. He was a man who had never been asked to look at the cost of how he loved. Sometimes all a person needs is someone who will not let the moment pass. He paused before adding, Patricia Booker had been waiting 19 years for someone to not let the moment pass. The least I could do was not let it pass. 1 year later, on the first anniversary of the episode's air date, Darius posted a photograph from his parents' most recent holiday. Gerald and Patricia were standing outside a restaurant, caught in the middle of a conversation, rather than posed for the camera. Gerald was leaning toward her slightly, the way people lean toward the person they are most interested in. Patricia was laughing, not the carefully maintained smile of a woman managing her expression in public, but the full, unguarded laugh of someone who has nothing to protect in that moment. Darius's caption was 4 words, They figured it out. It was shared 40,000 times before the end of the day. Gerald commented below it with one line, "Still learning. Still worth it." Patricia replied below his comment, "No you are." If this story reminded you that the people who love you deserve your respect, not your judgment, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every like and subscribe helps us bring you more stories about real families, real courage, and the moments that genuinely matter. Hit the bell so you never miss one.